Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Elizabeth Cohen, and I'm a medical journalist. I'm an NBC News health contributor, and I am so pleased and so proud to be here today. So thank you for coming to our event. And we all came to hear this amazing man, Dr. Elias Zerhouni, physician. I'm going to run out of fingers, I think. Physician, scientist, entrepreneur, former public servant. He was head of the NIH under George Bush, number 43? 42, I'm sorry.
I mean 43, so.
43, okay.
He's the second in the family, but 43 in the presidency.
43 in the presidency, yeah. And also presidential envoy to President Obama. So thank you so much for joining us here in Aspen.
Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you here. You have written this wonderful book, there you go, Disease Knows No Politics. I think we've never needed to hear this more than now, I think. Yes. So thank you for writing this wonderful book. I've had the pleasure of reading it. And I wanted to start at the very beginning. You were one of 7 sons born in Algeria, 7 sons. I can't even imagine what that must be like. But you said that you and your brothers were not allowed to fail. Your parents would not let you fail. How did that shape you moving forward?
You know, it's really interesting because I think people appreciate that what happens to you between the age of 0 and 10 is going to drive a lot of what your life is going to be. And primarily, it's your parents. In my case, it was my parents, and education. My father was a teacher. He was a teacher of mathematics and physics in the time of war. I mean, I grew up in the Algerian liberation fight against France, and we didn't go to school every day, you know, because you have danger, and then they close the schools, the teachers don't show up, and so on. And so the one thing I learned, which I really like to share with everybody, is that if you ask me, what's the secret? Why? I mean, you were born in Algeria, you're an immigrant, you came here, you were 24 years old, barely spoke English, and then you end up doing what I did. The reason number one is I learned how to learn. You know, I wasn't just fed. I learned how to learn actively. Why? Because, you know, when you have 6 brothers, you got to fight for food, you know, it's tough. But at the same time, you exchange. And my father was a great teacher. I mean, he wouldn't just feed you. He would ask you a question. What is 1 + 1 = 2? Why? What do you think that is? And you go on and you think and you imagine. And so I learned how to learn. And that was the secret. And because I also had the disadvantage of not going to school every day, right? It wasn't a disadvantage. It was probably the best thing that happened to me because I had to fill the gaps by myself and really compete with essentially your own knowledge, your own questioning, your own curiosity. That's what I want to convey to my students and my children. I think that is the initial trigger of why you can't fail if you educate yourself and learn how to educate yourself.
And during war, as you said, because there were so many gaps, you didn't have a choice but to fill in those gaps yourself.
That's exactly right. And I don't think you have a choice anyway. I think even if you go to a place where the school is open every day, if you just passively absorb, you miss something. You know, I'm a physician, and I really always think about the evolution of biomedical research and the complexity of the human body. I mean, imagine you come from 1 cell. And you know how many cells you have in your body? 37 trillion cells. You know how many neurons you have? 80 to 100 billion neurons. You know how many connections each neuron has? 5 to 10,000. So you have 1,000 trillion connections in your brain right now. And it functions in a way that we don't quite understand, but it's unique to each one of us because as 1 cell divides and divides and divides, the DNA is not copied exactly. There are always 2 or 3 mistakes each time there's a replication. The DNA Xerox machine is not perfect. And that leads to individuality. That leads to the fact that we're unique people. And you learn that throughout your life. And I think if you appreciate that, then the scope becomes different. You know, you just don't think, you know, narrowly in your own silo. You really think wide and connected.
You tell this very moving story in your book about when you were a boy and you and a classmate were speaking Arabic.
Yeah.
And tell me what happened and how that impacted.
Well, it's like old colonial wars. When you look at France took over Algeria in 1830, and their big dream was to make Algeria French forever. Well, to do that, you need to eliminate the culture of the people, you need to eliminate their language, you need to fight and take over the land, and they did take over the land. And so the Algerians were in poverty, and if you spoke Arabic in class, you were punished. And so I remember one time I had a friend of mine who told me a few things. He wanted to do a joke on a friend of ours, and the teacher heard him speak, and I answered in Arabic, and we got punished for that. You never forget that. You never forget that your identity is being basically destroyed, right? Fast forward, in the book, I also say that once the independence came, the opposite happened. If you spoke French, you were punished. So I got it both ways.
That's great. It's great to have it both ways. I mean, to have that second way. You and your lovely wife, Nadia, who is right there, immigrated to the United States when you were both young physicians for you to do some training at Hopkins.
Right.
And luckily for us, you didn't leave. But during this time, this is one of my favorite stories in your book. You're 27 years old, and the president of Algiers needs some kind of medical care, and you arranged for a U.S. military plane to fly to Algeria and get him the care he needed. And you were 27 years old. You've been in this country for a very short time.
Right.
How in the world did you do that?
Things happen in life you really can't predict what they would lead to. So the reason I came to the U.S. is because I wanted to do medicine. I wanted to do medicine. My father thought it was the most stupid thing you could do because math and physics is better, and medicine is just rote learning. And so I went to medical school, and I found out that he was right. I mean, there was a lot of rote learning. And so I was frustrated. And then the radiologist showed me the first CAT scan in the world. And I said, how is this done? And he said, well, there's an X-ray that turns around, and you detect the signal, you digitize the signal, you computerize the algorithm, and then you come up with the image. And I fell in love with that. I said, this is it. This is what I want to do. Oh. And my dean at the time, who had been trained at NIH, by the way, said, there's no way we can teach you this. We don't even have a CAT scanner. What are you talking about? I mean, go do something else. I said, no, that's what I want to do. And he said, well, I'll connect with some deans at Hopkins and Harvard who he knew. And he said, I have this crazy student who wants to do mathematics and physics and computing and imaging, biology, and I don't know where he's going, but would you accept him? And so the dean at Hopkins was a radiologist. And because he was around, Russ Morgan was his name, he said, why don't you come to my lab? And so I ended up at Hopkins. And I ended up doing very early research on CAT scanning, right? And a friend of mine was a resident, and his father was an entrepreneur. And in those days, CAT scanners would cost a couple $1 million. Not every hospital could afford it. So he came up with the idea of putting the scanner on a truck and going from hospital to hospital to hospital. But the father was very clever. He said, the military is going to need this. So you guys have to design me, myself and this friend, something that can go into a truck, that can go into a military airplane. And so that's what we did. And in 1978, I go to Algeria to take actually the Algerian exam because, when you come here, you can't practice unless you take an equivalency exam. Well, the reverse is true. So I say, well, your American diploma, nothing, it doesn't count. You got to take another one. And so I was there for that, and then I got a call that the president of the country had a stroke or something, he was unconscious, and they needed a CAT scan. And they had asked General Electric, they asked Siemens, and these guys said, well, we can, but it takes 6 weeks. And the radiologist who I knew, he said, do you know any other way we can do this? I said, well, we just actually finished the project. There is a scanner in San Diego that can go on an airplane and reach Algiers in 24 hours, and that's what happened. So they called Carter, the president, and he ordered a C-5 Galaxy, which is the largest plane, to fly from San Diego to Algeria. The next day he was there, and I get a call, say, we need you at the hospital because nobody knows how to make the scanner work.
So you not only got the scanner to Algeria, you then operated the scanner.
I did,
wow.
I did. And then 2 days later, I went to take the equivalency exam because they
That's kind of funny. You were the only person qualified to operate the scanner, but they still wanted you to take the equivalency. Well, there you go.
Bureaucracy for you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you were really on the cutting edge of this radiological technology. When you look now, we're on the cutting edge of a new era, of an AI era. People have very different opinions looking at AI and how it will impact medicine. From where you sit, what do you think?
Well, I talked to the fellows yesterday, and one of the things they asked me, said, how did you get to this career, and so on and so forth. I said, look, I was really at the beginning of a wave of computerized medicine, where computers will permeate all of medicine, quantitative sciences will permeate all of it, and then there will be a multidisciplinary approach to that, okay? Today, I think we have another wave, and the AI wave is going to be both. There's light and shadows, Every powerful technology has two sides to it, a good side and a bad side, and you have to manage that. And so I think it's going to grow by leaps and bounds. I use it now in my own research. I've used it for 4 years now. It's so powerful. You can't just throw it in the trash can and say, oh, well, there's a lot of abuse here and there. I think like everything else, we're going to have to be wise, and again, disease knows no politics. Let's not get politics into it. That would be the danger, is that if you do it with political outcomes in mind, you're going to really play to stakeholders that are opposed, and then you freeze. And other countries will get ahead of us. So I'm more of the sense that, yes, it is a revolution, it is a transformation, it is completely a novel world, which is just like computerized medicine was a novel world, but we'll have to be very effective at managing it.
Do you use AI like the rest of us, like you go to Claude and ask them questions, or are you a more sophisticated AI user?
Well, because I'm a mathematician in math and physics, I'm not a mathematician, but I understand it. I always try to go deep into exactly what it is that it does. And people don't appreciate that AI doesn't think. AI does not think.
So what does it do?
What it does, it assembles all of the data, all of the knowledge out there, and then it cuts it up in pieces called tokens, all right? And then it does a statistical analysis of where are these tokens in what we call vector space. So there's a huge vector space. I mean, space is 3 vectors, right? Up, down, left, right. Well, there's 4,096 vectors. And then he goes and say, oh, cat is close to dog, but dog is not close to car. And it places what we call a probabilistic model of exactly what it is that needs to be the next word and the next word and the next word. And that's why it hallucinates. It goes wrong sometimes. But that's exactly what it is that makes it powerful, because it can accumulate the amount of data, the scale, that no one can do here. None of us can do. Mm-hmm. The thing it cannot do is really breakthrough knowledge. And I tell you why I know that. It's because we've done experiments where we took the data that was there in 1905, and we asked the question, would the system come up with the theory of relativity of Einstein? And then you go fast forward, 1930. Would the system come up with quantum mechanics? No. And if you go forward, would the system come up with the structure of DNA? If you had everything you knew before 1950, right? And the answer is no, because it relies on the past. It doesn't really go forward. But it is a powerful tool that, in my view, enriches the human mind. Mm-hmm. Even though, we only consume 20 watts of power to do what we're doing right now, which is 100 less than one of these lights. Mm-hmm. But an AI machine, just the base is 200 kilowatts. So there will be a big crunch around energy needs, and then this tokenization, the number of tokens. It went from about a few 100 million to 1 billion to 1 trillion now. So the complexity, and this is why you have that race to data centers, because you can't really address complex questions and turn them into something that humans can use without having that fine probabilistic models that are called large language models.
So I'm going to fast forward by many decades past your time at Hopkins and at other academic institutions. You are nominated to be head of the NIH. You're in the East Room of the White House, and you say, You tell President Bush that you're grateful for the nomination, and you said, because it says about a great country what no other country can say about itself. So tell me what you meant by that.
Well, thank you for picking that up, because not a lot of people understand what I meant by that. You know, I was 24 with my wife. I had never imagined I would be in a position of leading the premier biomedical research agency in the world. And being an immigrant, number one, there's never been an immigrant in charge of the NIH. And so I felt that this was the American dream. And, you know, the American dream is something that is unique to our country, and it only happens here. So when I was asked the question, would a career like yours happen anywhere else? And the answer is no. And so when he said these nice things about me, that I was a quadruple threat, I was a teacher, a scientist, and this, I said, you know, he says more about America than he says about me. And that was the meaning of what I said. And I still believe that. You know, if we lose the notion of the American dream, if we, you know, cynicism comes up and anti-immigration, all these things come in and kill the American dream, we would have lost one of the fundamental strengths of this country. And I'm very thankful to America for what it gave me and my family. That was the meaning of that answer.
What you said.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Do you feel like we've lost any of that since that time?
Have we lost it? No. Are we at risk of losing it? Yes.
Why is that?
Because I'll tell you what, you know, I describe, my book is not just autobiographical, it's also observing nature, observing the society. You know, when I became NIH director, both President Clinton, President Bush committed to double the NIH budget. And then President Bush decided to do the Presidential Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, right? Fast forward, the current NIH director has been told to cut his budget in half and kill PEPFAR, right? So something has happened between the two. You know, it's politics, and this is why I say disease knows no politics, but what is happening is almost like a perfect storm for what has made us strong over the years. You know, since 1945, we've been number one in biomedical and research in general, and science in general. Why? Because there's this ecosystem that goes from federal funding to universities. Universities train the talent pool. They train enough bright people, but they can't train them without immigration, because there's not enough people in America as a small country, 350 million people. It's not so small. But even if you had 1 in a million geniuses, it's 350. Well, China is 1.4 billion, and then the same for India. So we are outgunned in terms of amount of talent that we can put together. And if you look at the Nobel Prizes, half of them are non-US born. If you look at graduate students today, half of them are not US born. So we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot. We're killing federal funding, which has been the key to discovery. We're killing the universities for reasons that have nothing to do with federal funding, for ideological reasons. Then we're killing immigration for reasons that have nothing to do with being and staying as a top research university, research country. And then you look at pharma companies, obviously for good reasons, for pricing, so we're hurting them. So the whole ecosystem is in danger, even endowments. I never thought, as I was the executive vice dean at Hopkins, the endowment is really what makes us able to do things without begging the government for it, right? And now they're taxed 8%. So there are universities that are paying hundreds of millions of dollars to the government and reducing the number of positions, the number of students they can take, the number of graduate students. And that connection, that thing is really discouraging capital. And the capital is going to China. When I was in industry, 0% of the molecules came from China in 2015. Today it's 37%.
Wow.
So why am I a little bit worried? It's because we have shaken the machine that supports the American dream.
You actually sound a bit worried.
Yeah, I am. But I'm an optimist, so.
Have you, maybe you can't talk about this, but have you made these views, I know you've said this publicly, but have you directly made these views known to anyone in the Trump administration?
Yeah, yes.
And
you'd be amazed, once you explain it like this and you say, look, I know that OMB wants this, and I know that another part of the White House wants the universities to heal, and then another part wants the law firms to fall apart, and then another part wants the immigration to stop, and they have, pushing all this. I said, every single one of them may have a good political reason, and it may be rational in the view of our libertarian politicians or conservative. They don't want a big government. Okay, I understand that. The problem is these are rational decisions from their point of view, but the totality is irrational from our point of view. Do you understand? So you can make very separate decisions in the complex system thinking you're doing the right thing. But the combination of all these right things is a wrong thing. And that's where I think we are, and that's what I say. I say, guys, don't destroy the baby with the bathwater. We've been there for 75 years. And it is encouraging to the new generation to hear them that we are still committed to that. Otherwise, the American dream will die.
Going back now to when you took on the job to lead the NIH, one of the big issues you were confronted with was embryonic stem cell lines, because these are stem cell lines that grow out of embryos. And you were told by a White House lawyer early on, be careful on the stem cell issue, you need to support the president's policy.
Yeah.
Was that a tricky road to navigate?
It was tricky, but the reason why I went along with it is because I was the executive vice dean at Hopkins, and I was head of the research section. We got $0 for stem cell research. Zero. All along, right? And I was very frustrated. Actually, I went to donors, and some donors came up, and we created an institute for cell engineering at Hopkins to pursue stem cell research. Because why? People will go into the news and they say, oh, stem cells to create, regenerate this and regenerate that. But from my point of view as a scientist, the real thing was that you could actually understand how DNA is programmed forward from one cell to you, and then backwards, reprogramming, we knew by then that it was possible to do that. And there was no funding. And then this big thing came up, and I was basically saying, look, I'm not going to accept the job of NIH director unless there's a clear understanding that we need to fund this research, right? And that's when the President Bush made what I would call a Solomonic decision. Mm-hmm. He said, all right, the 78 lines that have been destroyed, we will fund, because there's no question of life anymore, right? But going forward, we will never fund any more of that. So that opened the funding, but then eventually, people realized was limited. And my agreement was, I will speak to the science, I will tell you exactly where the science is, and he said, that's great. I mean, the president said, I want you to do that. I want you to stand for the science and leave the politics to me. So
when you told him these lines that you've allowed us to use are it's a good thing, but it's not enough.
Right, so it took a couple of years because it was good for 2-3 years. We increased the funding by almost $500 million, and we had the scientists working on it. And then when they came back, they said, look, the fact that these have been destroyed, they no longer have the capacity to tell us how a good one, healthy one will develop. And so we need to have access to fresh. And you can imagine the political tension about that, right? If you're pro-choice or pro-life. And so that happened in 2000. I was in 2002. We funded to 2005, and then by 2005 it was obvious. And then Congress at the time, and it's in the book, with the Senate Majority Leader, Bill Frist, who is a physician, he addressed it and he said, I testify, I say, we're fighting with one hand behind our back, and I know that other countries are making significant progress, like Japan, and we're falling behind. And he said, okay, well, we'll have to get a bipartisan bill. They did, to reopen that, and then there was a veto from the president. And I had that conversation with the president, and then I said, Mr. President, I have to tell the truth the way I see it. And I had a hearing just almost like a day before the veto, and Senator Harkin asked me, do you think we're falling behind in stem cell research? And I said, yeah, we are. Well, boom, Washington, you know the world. So there was it's not like the gambling markets that we have today. What's the odds that you'll be fired by this afternoon, if not this afternoon, tomorrow? But no, I wasn't. Actually, the president in the afternoon said, yeah, he told me the same thing, and I respect him. He's done a great job, and I need people like him to speak the truth. And so very different than what it would be here. I mean, I would basically last about a millisecond in this government.
Oh, goodness. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Would you even go to work for this administration?
No, I don't think so, because I told you, when I was asked, I mean, people promised to double the budget. Patient groups were anxious to get cures. We were finishing the genome sequencing. There was hope everywhere, and there was commitment, and bipartisan commitment. And I talk about this in the book, by the way. Even people who didn't speak in public, Democrats and Republicans, and they would grandstand and so on. I found out that they worked in the dark together to help NIH. And so I recount that. NIH was something that was, to me, at that time, a safe harbor for politicians. They fought everything, but when they came for health and cures and for patients, they really understood each other and tried to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so when I proposed the NIH Reform Act, it passed 414-0. Can you imagine in 2006 having the Republicans and the Democrats come together and having me say "Disease Knows No Politics," which is the title, because I testified to that. And I said, NIH should be above politics, not a political football, right? Because if you take an agency like this, you make it a political football, you have all kinds of conspiracy theorists, anti-vaccines, and all the things you hear today that come together, and then you have to be on the extreme of each side. And that is not something that I would like to be part of.
I think it's a good message for the young people in the audience that things didn't always work this way.
No.
It used to work differently.
And I hope they will get back to what they used to be.
You wrote in your book that during your time at NIH, the most difficult time wasn't, there was a SARS outbreak, there was an H5N1 flu outbreak, but you said that wasn't the greatest challenge. The greatest challenge was a conflict of interest crisis. It started with reporting in the LA Times by David Willman, and you described this crisis as a train wreck, that you were going through hell and you felt betrayed by NIH scientists.
Some of them, not all of them.
Some of them.
So
to explain a little bit about what happened. Right. And why it was hellish.
It was simple. I mean, they changed the rules before my time at NIH, and they say, oh, well, NIH scientists are not paid a lot, so they could moonlight. And somebody made a decision, I won't tell you who, say, well, after 5 o'clock, you're on your own. You can do whatever you want. And so about 30 of them out of 10,000, it's not all scientists, only a small group, decided to make a business out of this. And so one of them, for example, took samples from our libraries, sold them to a company, created a company in the UK, and took the patient samples without their consent. Yikes. To do studies on Alzheimer at the time. Another one decided to advise the FDA, be an advisor to the FDA, while he was advising companies at the same time about guidelines for statins and some things like this. People didn't know that, right? But this reporter found out that in the clinical center, there was a scientist who was doing that. And so he reported it, and everybody says, he's making it up, it's nothing. And I asked the people, I said, look, if you do anything like this, please disclose, because I can't defend what I don't know. And sure enough, they didn't disclose, at least 12 of them. And then Congress has a subpoena power. And Congress went to the companies, the pharmaceutical companies, said, tell us, who did you pay as scientists at the NIH? This was 2003, 2004. And boy, they had 527 reports. And then there was a hearing. They didn't tell me. And I say, how do you think you're going to maintain the trust of the American people when you can't even run your shop? And look at the number of people cheating and this and that and the other. I was shocked. I mean, that's when you know how many friends you really have. Because when you are the NIH director and you give out $30 billion of grants, you make a lot of friends in 24 hours. You will be amazed. I mean, everybody knew me, and, oh, you remember, I saw you, this and that. Anyway, when you have a problem like this in government, it's almost like the plague, you know, they go away. So
Meaning that scientists other than the 12 got mad at you for disciplining the 12.
I didn't discipline
Not
anything.
disciplining.
They didn't know. I didn't know what was going on.
No, for later on, did your colleagues support you?
Right. So later on, my analysis was a little different. I said, wow, we can lose the public trust if we don't tackle this thing. But it turned out the ties were a lot wider than NIH. They were in the industry, they were in the universities, and a lot of people benefited from that, you know, trips and gifts and things like that, which were common in those days. And to prescribe more drugs, and if you're a doctor, you're trained, you know, you're invited to this and that. It was a world that I believed was wrong. And I said, you know, I can either stand on the side of the public or the side of my colleagues who want the gravy train to continue, right? And I looked at the cases and I realized, I said, well, this is not just conflict of interest, it's criminal. In fact, one of the first scientists to testify took the fifth. So imagine you are in charge of one of the most important federal agency, the crown jewel of the government. You know that the discoveries of the future will depend on how clean and how trusted you are, right? What do you do?
So were they mad at you for ending that gravy train?
Oh, yeah. They're still mad at me. But the thing is, we have a thing called the Sunshine Act, which passed Congress, which, for those of you who are in healthcare, cleaned up a lot of that. And it's no longer possible to do what was happening at that time. So I'm proud of the fact that I resisted, I was resilient, I didn't back off, and I didn't really say, I need to stand with my tribe. I said, no, I need to stand with the public and the country. That was my job as a civil servant.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion, and I know that there's probably lots of questions out there, so we can start taking some questions. If you raise your hands, raise them high and obviously. There's someone in the front row here.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Spivak-La Rosa. I'm with Cedars-Sinai. I'm curious how much irreparable damage you think has been done by the current administration in terms of research development and funding, or if that can't be known, or like where do you lie in terms of optimism and pessimism on that front?
Well, I'm a fighter, so as you heard, I don't take things lying down. So we fought last year. We won with Congress. I'm very active. I'm on the board of the Foundation for NIH, and I'm on the board of the Research America. And all the advocacy groups, in particular, I'm very close to patient groups. And what I learned in my tenure is that the patients have a voice that is way stronger than scientists' voice or university voices, okay? So the irreparable has not happened. It's at risk of happening. And I'll tell you exactly where I think I see the tipping point. When last year, when they wanted to cut the budget by half, we acted and we created what we call, United for Cures, which is a patient organization, and then United for Science, which is a science organization. And we went all out educating Congress, educating the administration too, by the way, and saying, look, this is destructive, it shouldn't happen, and Congress listened to us. Even this year, they just passed the new bill where they're actually increasing again the NIH budget and other agencies, not just the NIH. So there is a resistance to these wholesale changes. What's really the tipping point now is a new rule that OMB has presented called the OMB rule of granting. How do you grant government money? And they're changing the rules of the game. But the thing that is really worrisome to me is the parallel decision they took of creating what they call Schedule F. Now, if you know about the United States, since Teddy Roosevelt, there's a class of political appointees and a class of civil servants. The civil servants are apolitical, and they serve the country, no matter what the administration is. The people who serve the president are 7,000 of them, all right? And these 7,000, about 4,000 are presidential appointees, and usually people have participated in the campaign, they're politically involved, and They're owed favors. They're usually bright people as well. They take the transitional team, and then 3,000 have to be confirmed by the Senate. When you have the Senate and the presidency and the Congress together, it's easy to get people appointed, right? But you have 7,000. Now, Schedule F is an executive order that says from now on, anybody who has a budget authority or a policy decision authority will no longer benefit from the protections of the civil service. They will become political appointee that can be dismissed by the president anytime, any day, for any reason. Just like presidential appointees can be dismissed, all right? So those two things, if we don't respond, which we are, to try to really make sure that the OMB rule, which really destroys peer review and basically makes it a political decision to say, we like you, you voted right, okay, give him a grant. Mm-hmm. And what did you say? Well, you don't agree with us? Well, cut her grant. That's what I am worried about. And that would be irreparable and very difficult to fix later on. So that's where we are. We're at the tipping point. It's a 2-year battle. I think the judges have stand by us. You know, the cutting of the grants were fought and overturned. The indirect cost was also fought. There were 16 attorney generals who attacked the government. So at least to date, the legal system is functioning in a way that is not what you see in Hungary or Poland or things like that.
So why do you think you'd only last 2 seconds in this administration? You said that earlier. Because you would speak your mind and you'd be out?
Oh yeah, I'll be in Gulag.
Let's see, there's a gentleman right here. Sorry, I will go to this side of the room after.
Dr. Zerhouni, it's John Noseworthy from our days together at the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, I recognized you.
Yes, you served so well as a member of our board, and thank you for that. Thank you for your incredible example. Just the way you think and the way you live your life is an example to all of us. My question is, there's a ton of learning coming from AI across industry and academic medical centers and so on. And as a scientist, we can't capture that information. It's not being reviewed, peer-reviewed and published and so on. I worry that the breakthroughs that will come from the combination of medicine science and AI will have a different degree of validation. And how do we capture that so that we move forward quickly to provide the best care, the best insights for our patients? Thank you.
That's a great question, John. I mean, this is a profound question. I don't have an answer. I know one thing is that, you know, if you rely on AI, you're at risk of hallucinating. And on top of that, the next generation, artificial general intelligence, is trying to address that. So when you talk to the, Demis Hassabis, the Nobel laureate, John Person, they worry about the exact same thing. How do you really validate? And the other thing is, how do you not pollute the wisdom that we've accumulated over thousands of years? You know, the knowledge that we've validated over thousands of years. How do you not pollute that? If you just keep feeding false information, which a lot of people want to do, into the body of knowledge that we have, you're going to shift eventually what I call the truth ratio. You know, how many truthful things are there as opposed to non-truthful things? So how do we do that? I think it's going to be both a technical solution and a solution of ethical control, if you will. Now, in terms of validation of science, you can see that some experiments are being done that I would call incremental experiments, right? They're improved by AI. For example, in my research, we developed very complex antibodies called multispecific antibodies. We used to do 1,000, 2,000 experiments to come up with one that's good. Now we use AI, and we find that AI actually eliminates all the bad ones until we only do 200 experiments and we have an antibody. So you're going to see an acceleration in productivity, in insight, if you will, but not at this point new science coming up. I really don't see that happening anytime soon.
In other words, the AI is going to get you there faster, but
Yes.
you have to know where you're going.
Exactly, yeah.
Let's see, anybody on this side of the room?
Quickly.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's the
Yeah.
woman in the back row.
You know, quickly, I want to say something that one word. The reason why. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Advocate journalist. I just have a comment. I must tell you I chose this session as soon as I read the title, because not only disease knows no politics, but also disability knows no politics. Anyone can become disabled because of an accident, disease or age, not just by birth or genetic. This session made me have a flashback of an ableist guy who started talking to my sister, friends and me about politics. He assumed right away that I was Democrat just because I'm disabled, and started saying that disabled people just want things for free. We didn't say anything because it would have been a waste of time and energy. Of course, he is ignorant about the entire process disabled people and their support team must go through so they can get the assistive technology they need to be independent, self-sufficient citizens. Definitely, science merits bipartisan support because a disease or disability does not discriminate between political parties.
Very, very touching. You know, what you just showed is exactly what I said before. The most powerful voice is the voice of patients, voice of people like you. You know, I used to bring patients at the hearings in Congress, and George was from Hopkins knows we started implanting brain pacemakers for Parkinson's patients, and I have this video of a parent who couldn't play lacrosse with his children, and he was very, very disabled because of Parkinson's disease. And then he got this operation, and then we filmed him afterwards, and he was playing, right? And I called him because I was from Hopkins. I knew the patient. I knew the team that came up with that breakthrough. And I said, would you be willing to come to Congress and talk to Congress about how important it is to support research? Because at that time, they wanted to cut the budget already. And so the patient came, and I showed the videos. And I said, now, let me introduce you to Mr. So-and-so. He is wanting to come and see you. They were talking that day about cutting our budget by about $1 billion, right? And some of it was this research. And so he stood up, he had a cane. He said, this is how I was, and now this is what I can do. Gentlemen, if you cut the NIH budget, you'll be committing a crime. I mean, it was so good, I was like, ooh. And some of them cried, and so we didn't get a budget cut.
Oh, wow.
And even though I kept arguing, it would be a mistake, and I would write memos and so on, one person like you, you know, what you just talked with the passion and the heart to understand that humanity is something that we can't give up on at any time for anybody. And so I can only agree with you.
Let's see, I think there was someone on this side of the room.
This is Karen
Oh.
DeSalvo.
Hello. First of all, thank you for your leadership across the decades, but especially in this really important time. I would love to hear you reflect on trust in science and how we can restore that in the American public. I see some of the policy and budget decisions that are being made in DC by OMB and others as a reflection of some of sort of more grassroots lack of trust in science. So please share with us what you do also.
Karen, I could not agree more. When I was the NIH director, we had a pretty good level of trust, and I was worried about losing that trust, right? I think we've lost a lot of it. If you do surveys about institutions in general, you know, there's a lot of loss of trust in universities. Congress, my God, Congress is in the tank. And so trust is going to be a fundamental issue. Now, if you do surveys of people, who do you trust most? My nurse, my doctor, my pharmacist, all right, come up at the top as individuals, but not as institutions. Now, let me tell you also why there is a loss of trust, at least in the biomedical area, which I know best. And that is that if you looked at 1975, when I came, as an immigrant to this country, I was convinced that our biomedical research enterprise was the best in the world, going really up, and that our healthcare system was the best in the world, going really up. The fact is, people lose trust when the reality is not what you described. And so, yeah, biomedical research went up. We could promise cures. Many of these cures have happened. But the healthcare system went down. And people are frustrated. They're angry. 50% of their economic issues come from medical bills. Well, try to get a doctor, in your own. John, how fast is it at the Mayo now? 3-4 months maybe to get somebody? Hopkins is about 4 or 5 months, so don't worry. Not fast enough is the answer, right? So there is a disconnect between what the discourse is and what people experience. That is the fundamental reason for distrust. When I looked at the definitions of trust and how people really define trust, to be honest with you, the best definition is from a Japanese philosopher, Musashi. And Musashi said, what is trust? It's the ability to predict someone's behavior. If I can predict that what you're telling me is going to be matched with your behavior, I'll trust you. Well, how many times do you have a disconnect between discourse and facts? So many times. So our society has an issue in general, and we do have an issue as an institution to explain to the American public what really happened.
It's so confusing to me to square what you said about how when there are all these surveys about who you trust, doctors and nurses come on the top, but so many Americans and a growing number of Americans don't trust vaccines.
It's not that many, it's 20%. It's 80% do.
Right,
Yeah.
but still, why are doctors and nurses so trusted, but vaccines and other elements of the healthcare system are not trusted?
Well, I tell you what, I think my personal view, is that, there's been a lot of distortion that people believe in. Belief comes stronger than evidence for many people. It's like religion, it's like other beliefs. And those beliefs have been reinforced by social media and the knowledge environment that we're in. And so now you have people who you can't argue, vaccines are bad, I don't want my kids. Measles? What's that? Because people haven't experienced now those diseases for decades. So you have that. Then you have also the frustration, lack of trust, and you say, well, I'm not going to go with conventional medicine anymore. I want alternative ways of treating myself and my family. And you see it around this campus. You can see all the topics that are not in the swim lane of traditional medicine. It's really enlarging the debate. So that creates fragmentation, just like we had 3 media network before, now we have 150. Mm-hmm. So it fragments, in fact, your perception of reality. Mm-hmm. And that is the one thing we haven't really tackled. And I don't know that I have an answer to tackle it. And I think it's really an issue because our healthcare system is dysfunctional and it's a disservice to our patients right now.
I think we have time for one more question. I think up front here.
Hi, my name is Deneen Ciccone. I work for Cancer Support Community. I kind of wanted to follow up a little bit on what you were saying about restoring trust with public and in science. Could you share a little bit about, maybe in your experience, what were some of the decision-making frameworks that might be helpful for entities and groups such as ourselves when we're having these conversations, maybe as we advocate with federal lawmakers, state lawmakers, about how you can continue to rebuild and keep the trust? Like, what is a way maybe that might help?
I don't have a magic wand for you, but I'll describe trust as concentric circles, okay? So at the center, why do you trust your nurse or your doctor or your family? Because you know them. You're interacting with them. And so this nucleus of trust is probably the most powerful there is. And that is the center of trust, where you and your immediate environment trust. As you go from there, then you have what I call the institutional trust. Hospitals, the doctors, and as a group. And that is really the place where today we have challenged, right? And then you have the big circle, which is the trust of everyone, right? The public. And those three are very essentially difficult to manage in one way. There's no one size fits all, right? So what we need to do, in my view, is really reinforce that fundamental core value that relates to you talking to your doctor, talking to your nurse, talking to your parents. You know, we never really did that, okay? But that's where the most trust is. Right now, you do every survey, it's 80%, 85%. I trust my doctor. I don't trust the NIH director, you know? I hope they change their mind. But, you know, the thing is, you know, and many of us are addressing it from different angles, right? So the cancer community is a good example of that. It's part of the intermediate circle. It's not institutional, but it's advocacy. And they do a great job, as you can tell. I mean, the Breast Cancer Coalition, the Prostate Cancer Coalition, all of the activities around the cancer centers and so on. So that's a good example, actually, of people saying, I trust my oncologist. That's reestablishing that central node. It's a complicated discussion. I don't have the answer, but I think it's a discussion worth having.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zerhouni, for everything today, and thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.